We're having a little bit of problem there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it might be where you are out there. Welcome back to the live stream. My name is Jeff Fritz, and this is C# with CSharpFritz. Look, it's all sunny and nice outside. It's a beautiful day. It's a great day to start writing code, and I'm glad that you're here with me. Let me say hello to the folks that are over here hanging out in the chat room. There they are. Hello, it's Palamin. Good to see you. Shy Sharp is here. Is that Yasar Tim? Good to see you. Hello, hello. Cymac, good morning, good afternoon. Twin Tadpole with the Super C# logo there. There's still a bunch of great emotes there. If you use the Better TTV plugin for your browser, you can check out all the cool .NET bot emotes that you can use in chat right here on Twitch. Make sure you check that out. Hey, Smab, good to see you. Black Eye is here. Kaiser Carl TV. Hello, world to you. So good to see you, folks. This is the start of what I'm calling season 2 of the stream here. Now, we had a short week last week here in the States. It was a holiday week. I still need to finish posting last week's video. We're going to be doing that today, and we're going to get this week's video posted as well. We're going to talk today about getting started with ASP.NET Core. We're stepping out. Right, season 1 was all about let's get started with C#. Let's learn the basics. What object-oriented programming is. What classes and interfaces. Some design things. Learned a little bit about solid architecture. The different base types that we have. And we're gonna take the plunge. We're gonna make that shift. We took a survey. We had a poll running out on the show website talking about, well, where do we go next? What platform, what user interface do you want to learn about next? And just edging out Blazor was ASP.NET Core. So we're going to be spending some time over the next, call it 12 weeks, learning about ASP.NET Core and how you can build websites, not just websites, web applications, and even microservices using this user interface framework that sits on top of .NET 5 and you can build and work with in any operating system, and you'll be able to publish content for any browser. Really great stuff, and happy to dig into that. Let's say hello to a couple more folks here. Timebender360, good to see you. Coding with Ringdur. Hello, hello. Line Ling, good. Is it Lane Ling? Hello, good morning. Twin Tadpole, so glad you're catching this. Makes you want to watch season 1. Fantastic. Well, I'm very happy to hear that. Of course, all the recordings end up going over to the YouTube channel, youtube.com/.net, and you can find the C# with CSharpFritz playlist there that has it has the first 11 episodes. Episode 12 we're getting posted, and you can also check out. We have a GitHub repository that has all of the samples, all of them interactive. You can download, you can try out. And today, I started going through and writing the content. I was like, I give this session so much. Let's do this live so that we can respond and hold up more of the discussion format with you out there in the chat room, answering your questions, and have these tent poles along the way, these different topics that I'll get to, we're going to go through, but I want to make sure that we answer your questions. Stick to this discussion-based format. So if you have questions and you're asking them on Twitch, we'll present them. You'll see they'll appear right here using the featured chat plugin that we have running, and we'll talk about it. We'll get through and answer and discuss your concerns, and we want to stay on a beginner level. I'm not going to get right in and discuss, well, gosh, how do you do the architecture for multi-threading of your ASP.NET Core application when you're hosting services on the backside with the CQRS architecture using AutoMapper, and you want to use something like Dapper to store data. Not getting into that. Start at the basics. We're going to build a website. We'll learn how to hook up data and do some of those other fancy things in the weeks ahead. So let me head over to the code, and we'll take a look at the website and the GitHub repository and get you pointed in the right direction so that you can find all of the content that we've built so far. There it is. Let me put on my glasses here. So I wear the blue blocker glasses here for computer vision. Helps out a little bit. This is our GitHub repository. If you're watching the YouTube recording, of course, there's a link to not just this repository, but all of the questions that are asked during this episode, as well as to the music that I need to start playing here. How did I forget to start playing the music? Oh my goodness. Let me share this link into the Twitch chat room. This is C# with CSharpFritz. Very easy for you to find on GitHub. There's the notebooks that we went through during season 1. There's also some samples sitting here. I reorganized a little bit in a sessions folder. There's season 1. You can find the 3 samples from episodes 10, 11, and 12. Season 01, episode 10, 11, and 12. And as I kind of figure out how today's session goes, it'll help me plan and lay out the project and the issues for what topics we're going to cover in the 12 weeks ahead. So that'll put us out so that we finish end of February, beginning of March, and we'll evaluate and we'll decide what our next user interface framework, our next .NET framework is that we work with. So let me get some music playing here in the background. This is Stream Beats from our friend Harris Heller, and this is in particular the Synthwave playlist. This is a bunch of easy playing, kind of tech sounding music that you can just groove to, you can listen to for free, and it plays nicely in the background here. No copyrights being enforced, no royalties being charged. You can listen to this music on your Twitch videos, on your YouTube videos, what have you. Thank you so much, Harris. We appreciate you making this music available for us to share and listen to on our video here today. Kind of fills the gap nicely in the background when I pause talking. If you want to learn more about Stream Beats, if you want to get a link to this, I'm listening to it right now on Spotify. You can check out, if you're watching the YouTube video, there's a link in the description just below. How's it going there? Chris Jones and Cymacker here. Hello, hello. All right. So we're going to talk about ASP.NET Core today. How do we get in? How do we get started with ASP.NET Core? What do I need to get started, Jeff? My gosh, ASP.NET Core, I'm so used to seeing ASP.NET, all those ASPX files floating around out there, and when I go to various websites, when I see that there's a web address that ends with a .aspx, I know that's ASP.NET. Gosh, so I really want to be working with that. ASPX is the old ASP.NET technology that was originally developed back in 2001. I defy you, I challenge you to find a good framework that's been around for 20 plus years. A web framework that's been around 20 plus years is still evolving, is still changing, and is now as fast and has as much investment being done in it, not just by Microsoft, by the .NET Foundation, by a number of other companies that want to see this succeed. ASP.NET Core runs on top of .NET 5. .NET 5, as we know, as we've seen, as we saw the launch at .NET Conf 2020, we know that .NET 5 runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux, which means you can develop on all 3 of those platforms. You don't need to be in a high-end integrated development environment like Visual Studio 2019 or Visual Studio for Mac. If you don't want to use those tools, that's okay. You can use the command line tools to build and compile your applications, and we saw how to do that in our previous episodes. Now, we were mostly building console applications. We were building some class libraries for testing, but we weren't actually getting in and building websites or write full applications, enterprise scale things that we can work with. How do we do that? You do need to get the SDK. Of course, go to get.net, and it brings you, it's a shortened URL. It brings you here, and you can get .NET 5. Make sure you get the appropriate .NET SDK for your operating system. Like I said, I'm going to repeat this a number of times. Runs on Windows, Mac, and Linux. There is no operating system that this will not run on. Okay? You will not be able to develop with. If you have a desktop computer, you can build and work with .NET 5. So let's take some next steps. I've already got this downloaded. I've already got this available on my machine. How fast is this, right? Why do I want to use this? Well, I have the Tech Empower benchmark. This is actually an older one from May. They haven't published the new ones yet. The Tech Empower benchmark from May, showing this is called the plain text test. This is when they're testing the raw speed of the web server. Just serve some plain text out, and let's see how fast it is. ASP.NET Core is #1 with a bullet. 7.3 million requests. Okay, I believe it's requests per minute. That's really freaking fast. And right, Pico V, right, this runs on top of the V language. I don't know what the V language is. Never heard of that before. But okay, so sure, that's a micro framework that you can use. But ASP.NET Core, right, this is running on Red Hat with some tuning. This is ASP.NET Core again, 7.3 million requests a second with C# and .NET with the Kestrel web server. We're going to learn about our Kestrel web server here. So extremely fast. And that's a great jump-off point for you to be able to build your application and know that you've got a high-performance web server that has no frills underneath you that you can start relying on. You're gonna see good performance from the first line of code that you write. What you do after that, the code that you write, the performance, the tuning, the way you use memory, that's up to you. Right? With great power comes great responsibility. With great performance comes a lot of memory that you can waste as well. So that's a thing. Let's get into this. So, okay, ASP.NET Core is fast. But how do I get started? Well, I've shown you in the past, we can get started simply at the command line. If you're in one of the Visual Studio products, you can do File New Project to get started, but I want to show you how to do this on the command line so that you can see exactly how this works. I'm on a Windows machine here, but you can see how this works on Mac and Linux as well. It works the same way, okay? Start with the .NET New command. Don't pass any arguments into it, and it gives you this huge list of templates. And I showed you the list of templates previously, but I'm going to zoom in here a little bit on these ones that are ASP.NET Core right here. Oops, I didn't highlight them all. Going all the way down to here. Okay. ASP.NET Core is a server-side framework. You're going to build code. You're going to build .NET code that runs on a server that browsers connect to get that interaction, to get their websites, to get web pages that you want to display to them, right? Your web server that executes all this code can have several different formats in how it presents, how it interacts with C#, and how it generates HTML and serves the appropriate CSS, images, fonts, and JavaScript to go with it. Now, I'm assuming that you know a little bit about HTML and CSS. We're going to touch a little bit on JavaScript, not a lot, but we're going to touch a little bit on it. We want to keep the focus on our C# development here. These templates, though, if you like working with Angular, if you like working with React, there's templates here that are already set up so that you can build your server-side interactions that you need to go with those client-side, those browser-side interactions with those JavaScript frameworks. So you have flexibility in how you want to build, how you want to interact with your application. Now, nothing says you're confined to just Angular or React. You can certainly use Vue. You can use any number of JavaScript frameworks. You want to use Svelte? Go ahead. You can build on top of this with Svelte. It's just not a template that comes in the box, right? That comes with the default .NET SDK here. That was responses per second on that. Thank you so much, Time Bender. I appreciate it. I look at that and I always the Tech Empower benchmark. But okay, 7 million requests per second is still massive. No, we will not be talking about expression trees. That's way too deep. This is a beginner-friendly session. So, we have all these different models. What do these different things mean, right? This can get a little confusing here, right? I mean, my gosh, I just want to build an ASP.NET Core app. Why do I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Why do I have 9 different templates, right? I'll throw out the Razor class library. Why do I have 8 different templates here that say ASP.NET Core on them? And really, if I were to take into account the ones that say ASP, or I'm sorry, the ones that say web on it, there's a heck of a lot more. But let's focus on the ones that start with the name ASP.NET, right? These are the ones that are going to build our web server, build our web interactions. So these are all the various ways that you can build. ASP.NET Core is not a very opinionated framework when it comes to how you want to build your web content. There's some architecture things that run behind the scenes that are very opinionated, but how you choose to build your web pages, how you choose to serve your web pages, there's several different ways that you can do that, and it wants to give you the flexibility to pick and choose exactly what makes you comfortable as a web developer. The empty template at the top literally is blank. There's nothing lit up in there. There's nothing in there that is pre-configured for you. It's a blank slate for you to build on top of. One might say it's an expert's configuration because you get to pick and choose exactly the pieces of ASP.NET, the pieces of the web framework that you want, how you want to configure logging, error handling, how you want to present and build web content that you want delivered. You have ultimate power to choose what pieces you want, where the other templates here all have various pre-configured things that are available for you to start with, right? It's already set up to get you a good bit of the way there. Black Eye, that's a good discussion for another session. How do we implement client-side validation and globalization? That's a good topic for maybe 3-4 episodes down. Not a bad idea at all to cover that. So when we look at the couple of models that we have to build, the first one, the oldest one that of these models that is currently available, is called MVC, right? This one right here, Model View Controller, and see, it's even cut off in the name. Model View Controller is a typical architecture that you would find in building applications. It's a software architecture where you have a controller that defines and handles some of the business logic, a model that contains some of the data that you want to present that is fetched and created by the controller, and the model is passed into a view. A view is more or less a skin. It's a theme that you put on top of that model that formats it appropriately for whatever type of output you might have. In our case, MVC here means we're delivering HTML, we're delivering web pages. And MVC is very much inspired by Ruby on Rails. It's grown a little bit and it's gone in its own ways, but it was very much the earliest versions of MVC when it was released back in 2008, 2009, were heavily inspired by the Ruby on Rails framework. The next template after that that's labeled web app here is Razor Pages. Now, Razor Pages really is a throwback to the way that folks were building originally with ASP, where you have a page of content and you build this page first mentality. I'm going to go to a page called About. Well, About should be just a file sitting on disk. Here's the template of what I want to present, and execute that. It's a page first, it's a unit of work that we're going to present and render delivered using the Razor templating engine. We're going to learn more about Razor today. Continuing down, ASP.NET Core with Angular, React.js, and Redux. Those three all have a JavaScript framework on the front side, and they have APIs. They have web APIs or even open API that you can use on the server that you can build and construct, and it'll serve all of that static JavaScript content that you build with Angular or React appropriately to be rendered in the browser. Just make those requests for those server-side interactions, those server-side APIs. Which brings me to, I'm going to skip Razor Class Library, to Web API. Right? It's not quite Open API, but it allows you to implement and use the Open API standard. You can apply that to it. But it's a very RESTful architecture that you can use to build those machine-to-machine connections that you need, right? You need to be able to serve data. You need to be able to offer an endpoint that folks can interact with on the web. You build that with Web API. It's not designed to, by default, deliver web page content. The expectation is you're building with some other tool to interact and fetch that data. Next one after that is the gRPC service. gRPC is a standard that has gotten a lot of traction in the last few years, and it's compressed down very small. The payload that you serve and interact with here, it's intended to be pretty much an RPC framework, a remote procedure call framework. You're going to reach out to a server, be able to make some sort of a command that you're going to execute on that server, and you might get some payload back or not. It relies heavily on HTTP2 so that you can do multiplexing back and forth and be able to see exactly, be able to get that multiple threading coming back into one server, be able to deliver big payload, big binary payloads down into whatever your client might be. So there's full support for gRPC with ASP.NET Core. If that's something that you're interested in doing, we will absolutely be having a gRPC session as part of this set of videos that we're going to be doing. So I'm keeping an eye on chat here. It looks like either I'm answering questions really good or no questions so far. All right. I'll continue moving on here. So describing these templates, no big deal. But I want to make sure that we get into and actually talk about the structure of the application. What does this look like, right, when we build our first application? So let me get down into the sessions folder here, and I purposely didn't create any content yet because I want to create it live with you, save it, and have it available here for anybody to be able to pick up. C4 asks, are these all recorded? Yes, they are. Absolutely. They're all recorded and they're made available over on the YouTube channel. If you go over to youtube.com/dotnet, check out the Fritz, the C# with CSharpFritz playlist, and you'll see all of the beginner sessions we did on C#. And we're going to be adding in now season 2 here, all about ASP.NET Core. Lane Ling, okay, we can answer that question before I start this. How is RPC different from any other web thing? Isn't any web request just execute command on a remote server? Spot on. You're right. gRPC, though, as a standard, uses something called protocol buffers to exchange messages with the server. Protocol buffers is a protocol. It's a format for sending data that is heavily compressed, very binary first. And what that means is you end up with a very small footprint of what you're executing and sending to the server and the data you're getting back. Like I said, if at all. So yes, it is very much go execute on the remote server, bring back some data, but it is in this protocol buffer format. Now that it It is required to use HTTP2, which also means you must have transport layer security and an SSL certificate installed on the server so that everything is secure. You have and then a very fast communication between your client and your server. It's just another standard that was developed that attempts to deliver high throughput with a very small message format. So, good question. Happy to answer it, and we'll see more about the benefits of that when we have our gRPC session a little bit later on. Hey, Ancient Coder, thank you so much for sharing the link. Yes, HTTP2 with gRPC. It's required for gRPC. So, you're welcome there. All right, let's get in. Hey, CLW, good to see you. Let's talk about, and let's build our first web application with ASP.NET. I don't want to build the empty one. I want to build one you can actually see something with. And we're going to use this one here that generates with web pages. ASP.NET Core Web App, and has the short name of just Web App. So let's do this. Let's build our first website. So I'll say .NET New Web App. And I'm going to pass in a -o argument. I want to write this out into a folder that we can work in. And I'll call this first app. All right. So this is going to scaffold. It's going to template. Oops. See that? I got the wrap there and didn't pick up on it. There we go. It's going to template out the content for this first application. -o, it's going to write it into, you see right there, the first app folder, and it's restored all the packages that I need in order to get started. Now, you may have worked with another programming language like Python or JavaScript with Node, and you have packages from pip or npm, or with PHP you have pair that you're restoring packages from, and you end up with those local to your project folder. The .NET team, we had seen how this behaves because we have packages from a service called NuGet, N-U-G-E-T, NuGet, that we serve, and we saw that when developers had a lot of projects on their drive, on their local workstation, you ended up with all these package files literally all over the place. And it chewed up a lot of disk space because you had the same package for formatting JSON in dozens of folders because those projects needed it, and it was required to be in the same folder. With .NET Core, we keep everything in a central global repository that is managed under your username, under your user profile, that you can go in and clean up if you want. There's commands at the command line .NET commands you can use to clean that up if you'd like. But when we do this package restore, it restores so quickly because it looks in that global cache first on your machine and says, hey, is it here? And if it is, it just creates a pointer to that file. It just saves, oh, here's the location on disk that you should go fetch this from. You don't need to go out and grab a copy from the server. So the package restore, unlike some of those other frameworks, runs very, very quickly because it uses the global store on disk first. If it does need to go out and fetch something, it'll put it down in that global store, and you'll be able to use it without re-downloading in your other projects on that machine. So, all right. So, if I take a look now, I have a first app folder here. So let's go into my first app folder, and I have these files. And we saw a similar structure when we built our console application, right? We have a CSproj file that contains information about what are my references, what are the things that I'm building and including in this project, right? So this is more or less like a manifest, right? If you were building with Node, this would be the same as what's inside your package.json, right? Scripts to build and test all your references, and we have the same thing. That's CSproj. We have app settings here, right? And we also have app settings development JSON. These two files, there we go. These two files define some of those some of those application configuration concerns that you might have that you want to change inside your application, right? You want to change the behavior of your application without modifying code, right? You want to put some variables, some parameters down so that you can modify the behavior. That's in these files, and we'll talk about configuration in a future episode. We're going to get into just building web pages to start here today. Maybe you want to use environment variables. Environment variables, and you'll see, are consumed and presented, and you can work with them inside of an ASP.NET Core application as well. Program CS, that looks like the same file that we had for our console applications. What's with that? That looks, right? I feel like I know what that is, right? Let's open Visual Studio Code. Let's take a look at a little bit of this. And it's just off screen. There we go. So let's look at program CS here, right? I'm not a fan of how everything starts with space formatting, right? I'm a big fan of using tabs for accessibility in your code. So program CS, this looks just like a console application. And that's because, sure, go ahead, you can do that. And that's because it is a console application. All ASP.NET Core applications are console applications. Why? Why is a website a console application? It doesn't matter whether you're running on Windows, Mac, or Linux. They all have a console. They all have a command line that your application can run at. And when it runs on the command line, well, that means I can also install it as a service. Or I can call it from a service and let that manage how that is being processed. So it's the lowest common denominator that just works everywhere. So I have very simple, right? We've seen public static void main. This is how a console application starts. It can take in some arguments from the command line. It does this create host builder, which is this method down here, pass in that collection of arguments, the arguments from the command line, build the host, and run it. What's that mean? Well, host, this is create our web server, right? Host, this is referring to our web server in ASP.NET Core, and that's called Kestrel. That's weird. Microsoft created something that isn't named Microsoft Development Web Server 2019 ++ Service Pack 2. No. We came up with a cool code name, that a kestrel, a swift bird, and that's what we wanted to inspire, and we were able to keep the name for that. Kestrel is the name of our web server. So this will build the Kestrel web server and set it up with some defaults. And that's what this configure web host defaults does. Give it some defaults of how it's going to provide a logger, how it's going to make, we learned about dependency injection, how it's going to make dependency injection available to you so you can build pages and provide those cross-cutting concerns you would have in an application, like logging, error management, analytics that you might want to run to see performance and be able to measure those interactions, database interactions, that cross-cutting concern of how do I go and connect to my database. These types of things that you always want to do on many different areas of your website are configured by default with some sensible defaults for you right here. Now, the source code for that is for all of this, because ASP.NET Core, just like .NET 5, completely open source and is available if you want to go take a look at it on github.com/.net, D-O-T-N-E-T. You can find all the source code behind how these things work, what exactly is configured in configure web host defaults out on GitHub. So it's going to configure the web server with these sensible defaults, things like, well, just log to the command line. You're running on the command line, just output log messages to the command line. The important thing that happens next year on line 23 is use startup. Once the web server is up and running, we need to hand off control to your application. We need to let your application take control and do those things that you want to customize, that you want to do to appropriately set up what you want to accomplish. And those all happen in the startup object, which is defined here as the startup for our application. And startup is kind of a magic convention that you can use, right? There's a convention to this that is picked up and used. Not many folks deviate from it. There are some tricks that you can pull to have it run different ways in different environments, on different operating systems, different locations. I don't want to get into that. I want to get through the basics of the startup class will be called and hooked in, and it passes over to Kestrel and says, this is how you configure the application. So Kestrel is going to reach in to that startup object. Oh, you're not going to give me F12 here and jump into it? No, you're not. Fine. So over here is my startup class. Now, I'm going to convert those to tabs again. My startup class has these 3 methods by default, and it has this configuration property here as well. The constructor that it starts with up here takes in a configuration object, right? This is, I showed you app settings. This is the configuration loaded from app settings and a couple other places, including those command line arguments, including system environment variables. They're all loaded up and made available to you as this configuration object that you can then interact with. And so that it's available for the rest of my startup interaction, we stash it in the configuration property here. The next method that's interacted with by Kestrel is the configure services method right here. Now, configure services is going to do those cross-cutting services and things that you want available throughout your application. And it does it using dependency injection, right? There's a service locator container that you can set up in this service collection object. So I can do things like say, well, add the Razor Pages runtime so that it knows how to interact with formatting content. That's what Razor Pages does. It formats content to be presented to the browser. So this says make the Razor Pages runtime available to Kestrel so that it can be used. Hey there, Sig was taken. Good to see you. I'm going to pause for a second here because I'm going through this quickly and we're about to get into a little bit more complex bit here. There are other services you may want to configure here, including other places that you want to log information. You may want to report statistics using something like Application Insights, Azure Application Insights. You may want to log, and you can configure how that behaves in this method. Your database interactions, you can configure and register them for the dependency injection service locator in this method. Now, once those are configured, we need to tell the Kestrel web server how to respond for each request that comes in, right? When somebody opens their web browser and they go to www.CSharpFritz.com and the web server picks up and starts listening and says, oh, I got a request here, I need to do something with it. What's the process? How does it handle that request? What are the things to do? Now, in other frameworks, you'll hear this referred to as the HTTP pipeline, right? This is how do I process? What are the steps that we take from top to bottom to interact with that request, right? We need to evaluate what this request is, how to process it, and how to respond to it. There are good ways to respond to it with appropriate HTTP status codes that indicate success, right? For those of you that know your web servers, you know that HTTP 200 and anything in the 200 series indicates a positive and OK response that we're sending back to the server. There's also 300 response codes that indicate some redirects and some other instructions that we want to send back to the browser. 300 status codes we want to send back to the browser with instructions telling the browser to behave and take appropriate next steps, like redirect, go somewhere else. The page is no longer here. 400 status codes that indicate you made a mistake, Mr. Browser, Mrs. Browser. You went to the wrong location, file not found, or we don't know what to do with this request that you've sent in. And there's 500 status codes that indicate, hey, there's an error that happened here on the server. We'll fix this. We'll get back to you. We have a problem, right? 400 series is you have a problem on the browser. 500 says there's a problem on the server that needs to be addressed. So we have these different status codes, and we need to know how to interact, how to present those appropriately, and inspect the requests so that we can take those next steps. So that's what this is. This is configuring our pipeline. So in the configure method here, each one of these lines is how we proceed through the pipeline. And that request proceeds from the pipeline, proceeds through the pipeline from top to bottom, and then back up. I'll explain. The first set of lines here that we're going to interact with is this, right, env, the web host environment is passed in. Is this environment considered a development environment? Is this an environment where we're writing code and we should behave and have developer concerns? Then let's behave appropriately, and it configures a developer exception page. Now, I'm going to drop a couple references here, and you're going to go, oh, yeah, I know what that is. Maybe you've seen some websites that you go to, and there was what we used to call the yellow screen of doom, which was it had a white background, and there was a yellow block in the middle of it with some red text that would say application error has occurred, and there was a whole bunch of code that was spit out to the screen. That's a developer exception page. That's a page that only developers should see because it has information about the source code that presented that page. It's actually a little bit of a security concern that you're exposing some of that information to the public. That can definitely be a security concern. So right off the bat in the template, only if we're in a development environment do we make that page appear. And actually this is an evolution of that page. The developer exception page is now blue, and it contains a little bit more information that you as a developer are going to want to see. Information about the browser, the state of the browser that requested content, the state of the server, and the stack, that the trace of here's what errored out to present back for a developer to be able to track and understand what's happening. If we're not in the development environment, use an exception handler, and that exception handler is going to live at this address, /error. So this way, if you're not a developer, if it's running for maybe your QA environment, running for a staging environment, running for production, somewhere out on the cloud, I can't think of any blue clouds that you might enjoy using, hide that and show this error information, and we can take appropriate steps to log it behind the scenes. Configure HSTS, right, for secure transactions. We're always going to set up HTTPS redirection. By default, let's make sure that we're using a preferred HTTPS, HTTP2 server and protocol to interact with this. Static files. So by default, you need to turn this on. It doesn't serve CSS, JavaScript, HTML, those files that you might have saved on disk. It doesn't serve those by default. You need to turn that on in order for those to be served. And that's okay. That makes a lot of sense if you're building a microservice, if you're building just an endpoint that machines should be interacting with. Those files that are going to help support making the design of your application look good, those may not be served. Those might not be needed. So don't confuse the server by adding that responsibility in if we don't need it. Routing is how we turn addresses like this, how we turn a request for a page or a folder location. It's how we turn those into code that we want to execute. I'm going to pin your question here, Caparino, and we're going to get to that in just a second. No. Is it going to let me? Yeah, there we go. Continuing. Authorization, if we want to set up security, if we want to say, hey, you're not allowed to access this content, we can use authorization. Now, there's two parts to this: authorization and authentication. We're gonna have at least one episode on those two topics, how we can configure those various capabilities. That's a great point. That's a great way to describe that, Fresh Dawn. Let me put this up. This is how we're defining the capabilities of our application. Well said. Thank you. I like that. I like that a lot. We're defining the capabilities for the application, right? We're turning on security capabilities. The last bit here are the endpoints. What are the endpoints? Where is the actual code being executed that we're going to present? And we're going to turn on Razor pages. We're mapping them. We're going to map addresses into Razor pages that we're going to render and present. Okay. I mentioned that this goes back up on each request. So if there's an error in creating or building one of your Razor pages, instead of it just dying here and falling out the bottom, it walks back up, and as it's walking back up, and any of these other things in the pipeline have anything to add in as they see, oh, we need to report an error, it's going to go all the way back up until it hits that if statement and says, oh, we're returning an error here. Let me intercept that. And in development mode, let me show you a developer exception page. Oh, I'm not in developer mode. Let me show an appropriate error page that hides some of that and logs the data appropriately. Hey there, Simon. Welcome in. So that's how this works, and we're going to see there's all kinds of ways that you can inject and control and do fancy things in here. But to just build a website where we're serving pages, and eventually we're going to write some code that interacts with a database, this is very simple, and you don't need to get into configuring it extensively to be productive. There's sensible defaults to get you going. Now, I've mentioned again and again and again here, Razor pages. Well, our Razor pages, our content that we're going to actually write code to render, live in this pages folder. And if we open it up, you see there's these files. There's that error that maps to this error.cshtml. Razor pages are identified, right? Razor templates, right? The Razor templating language that we're going to learn about here. Those files that are parsed and handled by it are identified by this CSHTML extension. Think about it. It's HTML formatting that we're going to format using a little bit of C#. So we're going to jam together C#, the .cs extension, with HTML. Boom, CSHTML. So that's a Razor template. And there's a little bit of code that goes with it, and we store that. We put an extra extension at the end, .cs. If there's just a straight class, a standard, plain old C# class that we want to use, well, we can work with that and put it in a .cs file next to it. And we'll learn about these. They're a special type of class called a page model that we'll work with. There's an index page. Index, of course, is a default endpoint, a default document that you would serve on many different web servers. Index.cshtml is the default here. There's a privacy page for your privacy policy. All web servers now, thanks to many different governments, you should have, as a good practice on your web application, you should have a privacy policy so that folks know exactly what data you're collecting. For a simple website like this, we're just collecting log information, no personally identifiable information. So, hey, how's it going there? I see some new friends. Yes, this is ASP.NET Core 101. Yep. Let me grab a couple of questions here before I get into these. There's some good questions coming up here. Let me start with Caparino has a question here. When an application is published, is the environment changed automatically? So here in the startup, right, I said environment is development. That environment actually comes out of an environment variable called ASP.NET Core environment. And if I open this, right, there we go. And if, right, if I say, can I do, is it echo I can do here? I'm going to get confused. ASP.NET, is it, I'm confusing my environments. ASP, no, it's % on Windows. ASP.NET Core, or is it, right, ASP.NET, I thought it was just ASP.NET environment, right? There we go. Nope, I did it wrong. Was it ASP.NET Core environment? I'm gonna blank on this. Nope. Nope. Darn it, I'm forgetting. Nah, $env is right. It's gonna show you all the environment variables. If this was just a regular command prompt, right? It would be echo, right? ASP.NET Core. No. Why? Well, it's not set there. Yeah, ASP.NET Core environment. That's what I thought. If I get rid of the %, it just echoes the text directly. So it's not set over here. If I do set it, ASP.NET Core environment, right, you would typically set it on your workstation to development. No, I'm still not getting it. No, I just set it, but it's not gonna... Why am I blanking on this? No, still not giving it. It is set... No. I should be able to see that environment. I don't know why I'm not seeing the environment variable. I know those other places that it's set. I'm trying to show that it works over here. What folks are pointing out is that now there is a properties file down here with launch settings, and there it is. It will be set for you by default for your application. So this is when you're in and you're launching and you're debugging. When you're in another environment, you set this environment variable in that other machine to staging or QA, or if it's not set at all, it defaults to production. So, yeah, I don't know why the variable expansion isn't working for me in either of those terminals. Right, I don't want to do set because you're going to see everything, but I don't think I'm going to see it here. No. Right, and I thought it was a % on the end also. Still no, it doesn't see it. No matter. Okay. So that controls what environment you're on. And like I said, by default, defaults to production. If you have different settings you want to have lit up with other configuration for logging and reporting, because you have a test environment, you can set it to staging, test, whatever it might be, and you can add other similar queries here, right? I can say env is, right, production, staging, and I can say is environment and pass in an environment name. Maybe I have a different set of tests that I have for my European my European servers, so I'll pass in, you know, is environment Europe, and it'll test to see if that ASP.NET Core environment is Europe. Okay, so this isn't a an environment variable that you're testing against and configuring your application appropriately. The variable doesn't exist by default on the development box, but when you use the development tools, it will launch and add that configuration for you. I'm going to go to Nilecrack's question here. How do you change the default landing page? As we're building our pages here, so here's index, right? By convention, this is the default page that you're going to go to. I can see, here's the HTML that we're going to render that is in the middle of my page. All of our pages in Razor start with @page up at the top. And you can see these, by default, all have @page up at the top. You can configure a different file to respond on the root by adding an argument after this with whatever file name you want that to answer instead of the default name that's provided, right? So maybe I want a file called my first page to be the home page. Well, if I put @page/, that'll be the page that gets picked up first. So it is, variable expansion is per session, yes. So, nope, don't save that yet. Let me, Timebender has a question here. It's a little bit further ahead, but does it make sense to use Razor pages compared to MVC in a .NET 5 web app? Does it make sense to use one over the other? I wouldn't go and convert things. You can use both of these user interface technologies together. However, one isn't necessarily faster than the other. One has a lot lower ceremony to get started than the other. So I don't need, right? I don't need to go and learn about the model view controller architecture and build 3 files for every web page that I want to create. Razor Pages is just a heck of a lot easier for me to get in and build just that HTML, just that C# interaction. You can still use MVC if you want that very structured, very formalized approach to how you work and build your web pages. And we'll see more about MVC in a future episode. Now, we peeked in here at some of these Razor files. Let me show you index.cs.html. Right, let's talk about actual Razor pages here. Well, you know what? I talked about the pages folder already, and we're starting to look here. What about all the CSS and static files, like, right, my JS files, my images, all of those things? Well, those are served out of the www root folder down here. This folder is kind of graphed onto the root of your web application. When you tell startup use static files, you're telling it to look for and use that www root folder. The content of this folder, like I said, is going to be exposed and graphed onto the root of your website. This way, any files that you want to serve that are CSS, JavaScript, other libraries that might be appropriate for you to make available to your browsers, to your visitors, are all sitting here, and it tells the web server, don't interact with this content. There's no reason to engage the .NET runtime to interpret this. Just hand it out. Just stream it to whoever requests it. That way, right, it can present that faster, and it'll put a long expiration header on it so that folks aren't constantly coming back and requesting that same JavaScript file or the same CSS library every time. Automatically does that for you so that you don't have to be concerned with it. And there's ways to configure the expiration time on those behind the use static files configuration. You can do research, you can look up how that behaves if you want to configure that further. So these files, will, like I said, will be rendered and made available using that same folder structure that's inside of here. There's a /CSS off the root of my website, a /JS, a /lib, and a favicon ICO off the root of my web application. Okay. Similarly, the content inside of pages is served from the root of your web application. So what ASP.NET is going to do is it's going to put these two together. It's going to weld together these two folders. The contents of www.root are just served out directly. The contents of pages is being interpreted and managed by the .NET runtime and then rendered appropriately. And by putting on the top of each one of these files, these CSHTML files, an @page directive up at the top, it indicates this is a page that you should serve, and by default, serve it from the location of this file inside the pages folder. So this one would be served from /index, and because index is typically a default document, as I mentioned earlier, it'll serve it from the root, the bare folder name location. I'll go to /privacy and I'll get this information where I would put my privacy, my site's privacy policy. Okay. Now, let me park your question there. Is that Zakino-kun? Let me park that. Come back to that in just a second. What I want you to see is there are these @indicators here, right? And these are a couple directives at the top of these files. Same thing over here, right? @page, @model. These are directives. @something at the top of the page with a argument after it. These are directives that control how the page is being processed, how this file is going to be picked up by the Razor template engine and presented. So these are pages with the @page directive. @model says there's a page model that goes with this. Now the page model is a C# class that runs side by side, and here it is. By convention, we store it in a file with the same name in a .cs extension, and we have a class here that has the interactions that we want to perform and interact with for that CSHTML page. In this case, our index page is going to receive, through dependency injection, a logger here on line 15. Give me some sort of logger that I can interact with that's specific to my index model, right? If there's any kind of configuration that needs to be done for the index model category, go ahead and do that and hand me that logger object. I'm going to stash it in this field up here so I can log information about processing as it happens. And there's a method down here called onGet. Notice it's not an override, it's not protected, it's onGet. This is a method that by convention will be executed when the get HTTP verb is fired, right? There's 4 basic verbs in HTTP, in the hypertext transfer protocol, in the protocol, right? Get, post, put, and delete. There's a couple other ones out there, options and head and patch. We're not going to, those do a bunch of other specialized things, but those other ones are the ones that you typically see from a service or when you're interacting on the browser, right? When you're in a browser, you typically only see get and post, right? Post is when you click a button on a form and it bundles up and sends the contents of that form to the server. Typically that's done with a post verb. So on get is when somebody keys in an address or clicks a link and goes to your web page, a get happens. And we're not doing anything specific here. We're not taking any extra actions with our get action. So that's going to process and it'll return the contents of our HTML page. But we can inject and do other things in there. Fetch data from a database, log information, whatever you might need to do, you can interact with it in that get method. Let me go back to this question from, is that Zakino-kun? How does MVC ASP.NET actually ship in 2020 with jQuery? Yes, it does. jQuery is still very much maintained and used. It's still quite popular. A lot of folks use it, and for simple interactions, building with JavaScript that we know are going to work in every browser, jQuery is still pretty good for that. So it is still shipping with jQuery, and it's easy enough to remove and make appropriate other choices if you want to use another framework. Let me see here. Oh, glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. You got sponged. Glad to hear that you're enjoying the solid discussion from our previous episode. All right. So let's actually run this. Let's actually see what this looks like, and we can talk through a little bit more of how that Razor page is built and delivered. So just like we saw previously when we're building .NET console applications, we can configure and launch our .NET, our ASP.NET application with the same command, .NET run. It will restore any packages that need restoring. It'll build when necessary to build my application, and it will then run the console, which we saw creates a default host builder, adds sensible default configuration, hands off processing to startup, and I now have my web server running. And the web server starts logging some information, some basic information right here to the command line for us. We mentioned about the hosting environment. Because we ran from the SDK and that those launch settings are present, we're in development mode. It configured for development. It's listening both on HTTPS 5001, localhost 5001, and it's also listening on localhost 5000. This way I can browse to localhost 5000. It'll detect that you should be on a secure connection and redirect me to the 5001 instance of the web server. It's one web server, but it's listening on both ports. Okay. Control C to shut down, and here's the root. Here's where the application is running out of. So let's head over to my browser and let's take a look at our first website. So I'll go to localhost 5000, and you see right away it rerouted me to HTTPS localhost 5000. So right, it's keeping me secure. It's putting me on a secure web server. Now, what I want you to know is ASP.NET Core comes with a self-signed certificate. It creates a self-signed certificate, installs it for you when you install the SDK, and it may throw errors on some browsers. You can acknowledge, you can accept that because we know that it's been created and it's being served, verified from localhost. It's here just so that we can be sure that our code works in SSL format, in TL, transport layer security interactions. All right. Page and model directives are similar in Blazor, and Blazor's about 3 months down the line. So yes, very similar. So I get a welcome, learn about building web apps with ASP.NET Core. If I look back at my page that I was building, I don't need this one, right? So here's my index, right? There's my H1 tag, my header tag, welcome. Learn about building web pages with ASP.NET Core. So this HTML that was in the middle of my page is being rendered and output right here. I expect there to be an anchor tag. We had an anchor tag in our Razor page, and there it is. Now, where'd these other things come from? This header bar, this footer bar, where'd all that come from, right? And this says homepage first app. Where'd that come from too? Back over to the code. So In Razor, we use the @ symbol, right? We use we use this to indicate it's Shift-2 on your US English keyboard to indicate, hey, there's some C# code coming up after this. In particular, if we use curly braces, we denote that there's a code block being executed after that. Now, that code block is formatted, presented, and interacted with just like any other C#. So I have an object called viewData that I'm interacting with that has it's a collection. So I'm going to set on the viewData title object, I'm going to set the value homepage, and it ends with a semicolon because this is a normal C# command. It's a normal C# interaction inside these curly braces. Okay, Fritz, where's that homepage thing go, and how did all the other things in the layout come from? You told me where the homepage and the title came from, right? And homepage, right, it's up there, but still, where'd these other things come from? Our Razor pages have the ability to reuse content. And that's what the shared folder is here. This is content that we're going to reuse across many different Razor pages. All of our Razor pages by default, when you request a page, go through the View Imports page, which has, gosh, a using statement. We know what using statements are. We've seen those in our other C# class files, right? We've seen that before. It defines a namespace. We're going to format the namespace for our Razor pages so that they all, if we need to refer to them, live within firstapp.pages. And if we create folders underneath of here, those appropriate folders get added on, folder names get added on to the namespace as well. This last one here, Add Tag Helper, this is a feature that is specific to ASP.NET Core that allows you to add in tags that behave a little bit like directives that you might have seen in Vue or Angular. Even in React, you have tags that behave and act like, right? There's some code that runs behind them, but format my HTML using these tags, go execute some other code that's written somewhere else, and output their content right where that tag is. That's what a tag helper is in ASP.NET Core. And we're going to add and make a library of tag helpers available that lives in the ASP.NET Core MVC tag helpers namespace. There's a lot we're covering here. Now, after it goes through and it processes these using statements, these things that we want to configure that all the pages use, it goes into the ViewStart page. And the ViewStart, typically, this is right what we're going to do for every page that's rendered. Well, we're going to specify layout equals underscore layout. Well, that seems straightforward. We're defining the layout for the page. We're specifying, hey, these Razor pages have a layout that you need to render first. And in that layout, it's going to tell you to come back and where to insert the actual content of the page. So this is a little backwards in how it's rendering, right? If we request the index page, it starts at View Imports, imports all those using statements and things, goes through ViewStart and says, oh, there's a layout here you need to use. That layout is layout CSHTML, right? Underscore layout points to this file. You don't need to include the .cshtml. This has all of our HTML in it that formats the page. Now we're talking. Now we're getting down to brass tacks here. Head, body. I'm used to seeing this. This makes sense. Okay. There's a couple things in here that are unique to ASP.NET Core that I want to make sure you pick up. Hey there, Luke. Good to see you. And is that how do you pronounce that? Zephanat Dev? And LiQB2. Let me turn these. Let me pin these questions that you have. Yeah, come back to that in just a second. So we saw view data title right here, homepage. that's being picked up and used right here. So the view data is right. View data title is being injected right there. And here's the first time where we're seeing .NET code being emitted directly into our output HTML. If you put an @ sign and immediately after it list any .NET command, any .NET method or property, it will evaluate that and take the string output for it and drop it right there in your Razor template. So here where it said homepage, that's evaluated and pulled out of this collection and dropped right here. So we get homepage dash first app when we look at our page. Homepage dash first app. That's what you see inside the header over here. Come here, you. Title, homepage first app, right there. Okay. That was rendered, that was generated through that Razor template. Now, let's continue on here. Style sheets, and you see, we get to use that / reference to indicate go to the root, right? Just like you would on a Linux or a Unix machine, Unix-based machine, right? / go to the root of the application / CSS site CSS, right? We know that that's in our web www root folder, not web pages, www root folder, CSS site CSS. That file is being included by that, right? This is the merging, the graphing together of both .NET and our static files. Cool. Continuing down here, there's a nav element, right? Nav is an HTML5 tag, buttons, and we see anchor tags here, but they have a couple extra attributes on them. ASP area, ASP page. These are some of those tag helpers. Okay. So yes, it's the home, the home of the application, the content root, is what it's / going to, / going to. So these arguments are indicators to the Razor templating language. Hey, yes, we're going to emit an anchor tag, but there's something more going on here that you need to execute and bring back and generate here. So let me come back to so these are going to evaluate, look at where those files exist on disk and generate an href appropriately for us, right? We'll get more into that when we talk about routing and tag helpers in the future. Render body is where we tell the layout, here's where you stick the content of my CSHTML page. All this stuff down here is going to be emitted right there where render body exists. That's pretty easy to understand. That makes sense. So that's with how infrequently you build layout pages. This is one of those set it and forget it types of things, right? Here's where we're going to output the content. Drop it right there. But there are also things down here. Another tag helper we can see right here. ASP append version. So I mentioned about how the content inside of our www root folder will get an expires header that is way out in the future. Typically, you would have to use a technique called a cache buster, right? Some sort of a token you put on the end of the file name so that it knows, hey, this is a new file. The browser should request that new file again because it doesn't look the same as the last file name that I retrieved. So what this does is it appends a version number to the end of the request for site.js so that you get a new version when that file changes. Well, actually, not even when that file changes, but specifically when the ASP.NET application changes, you'll get a new version number and it'll force a new download of that JavaScript file to the browser. So that's another feature built in here. Last thing that I want to show you here is render section async. right? So we saw render body, but if I have script files that I want to put into my layout here, what we've done by default is we've given you a section that we can specify inside of our pages and say, well, go put the contents here in my layout. I can define a section of my page and drop those scripts that might be appropriate for only my user profile management pages, where I'm going to upload and manage photos of my user profile. I might want to only have those scripts emitted on those pages. Fantastic. That's something that we can include on those pages. Optionally, it's not required to include those. Optionally, I can include those, and they'll be added here. So if I want to include those, I add a section directive, and I can output whatever information I want to appear at the bottom of the page with all of those scripts. That's not bad. That's easy to understand. I can figure that out, right? So I'll just put down here for the sake of showing, right? Hi, Jeff. And, right, that's just an HTML comment. I'll save, come back over here, I'll restart the application, and oh, I forgot to provide the identifier. So I need to call it scripts here. Scripts, so it knows exactly what that section is. Now I'll go back over, rerun it, and it'll see what that is. Ta-da! Come on. There it is. Back over to my web page, refresh, and I'll even do a control U. There it is. It rendered my little hi Jeff at the bottom of the page. So, nothing complex. That's how we interact with our layout. Let me come back to the questions that we had here in chat as I was going through and explaining. So, the first question from LyQB, does Razor have hot reloading in development mode? You can do .NET Watch and it'll rebuild every time there's a change. I don't know. I don't think it does hot reload. It does hot reload when you're building with Blazor. So instead of just .NET Run, I can say .NET Watch Run. And I don't think it will automatically rebuild, force the browser to update. I don't think it does that. Refresh. Right? So now if I change my page over here and I change this to Hi Visual Studio, save, I don't think it's going to force a reload. So it rebuilt because it's all changing the files, and I don't think it forced a reload. Oh, maybe it did. It did. And there, yep, look, there it's doing the reload, the hot reload code. So it is there now in .NET 5. It will do the hot reload. So yes, it's there. I'm pretty happy to see that, actually, because that was a pain in the neck. So hot reload is there, and because it does a compile operation on the server for these, right, it's going to recompile, redeploy, and update. So, right, if I go back over to my code and let's do something, right, style equals color blue. Welcome Visual Studio. Right, let's put Visual Studio in bold. I think it already is bold, but so I save. It's going to rebuild, redeploy. There it is. Cool, right? That's going to help you with developing and getting it processed faster. How do you enable hot reload? Asks Alpha and Golf. When you start the application at the command line, .NET Watch Run. Now, if you're in Visual Studio, it already has hot reload wired up. That's something that comes out of the box. It already does that for you. So, Is it correct for the ViewStart page to refer to roles, for example, student or teacher? No, I would not do that in my ViewStart page. I would do that on specific pages where you can add authorization there. You can add and you can specify these roles are only allowed to access these folders. And in fact, you can even define policies. When we get into our security episode, you can define policies inside the startup class that will hand off and interact with roles appropriately. So, Chris here says ASP.NET Core does not equal .NET Core or .NET 5. ASP.NET Core is the ASP server product name. Yes. ASP.NET Core is the name of the framework that runs on a server. It runs on top of the .NET 5 runtime. Previously, it ran on top of the .NET Core runtime. Before that, the .NET Framework runtime. So, yes, thank you for clearing that up. Fresh Dawn has a question here. Can we have a collision file name collision between static files and, well, not Blazor. We're not using Blazor here, but our Razor templates. I think it throws an error appropriately if you do. Let's try it out. So we have privacy is a page that you can go to here, and there's where your privacy policy would be, right? And all the content from my layout is still here. So let's write a privacy HTML file into root, and let's see what happens. Right? So I'll just create privacy HTML. Right, and I'll use my HTML5 snippet. Privacy page from root. This is my privacy policy from too many R's. There we go. Right? Save that, and back over here, this should refresh. It's not actually gonna, it's not even gonna reload, right? Yeah. So if I refresh going to /privacy, I get the content page. I get the Razor page. I don't get the privacy HTML. If I go to privacy.html, it does go to that page. So it's not necessarily a collision, but, right, you're able to have both contents. So, now, maybe if we had, right, if we really try and muck with this, right, if we add a folder here, right, new folder, privacy, and if we move this into it, right, we can try and break this, right? Oh, I like trying to break things. We call this index.html, so it's the default name inside the privacy folder. And if we go back over here and we try going to, let me go back to the root, right? That still works. And if I try go to just /privacy, now /privacy/index would be my page. That still goes there. If I go to /privacy/ still goes there. But if I force the index.html, it goes to there. Okay. So, different file extensions. All right. Let me see, I'm keeping an eye on Visual Studio 2019. I think if you start without debugging, it will automatically reload. Right? If you do Control F5, it should automatically do the reload. Might be because of where the content is in startup. Well, let's take a look back there. We're using static files, right? Those should be fetched first before the Razor pages, before the routing kicks in and these things. So if it found a static file that had the same name, right, as a route, as an endpoint, a C# endpoint, it should return the static file first. And I mentioned about, well, maybe you want to change the name of where these live, right? Maybe I want my privacy policy to live at slash oh my gosh, what's the European standard that it's for some reason I have DMCA stuck in my head. It's not DMCA. It's, help me out here, chat. What's the European privacy law? It's GDPR. Thank you. Right? Maybe I want to have this route to slash GDPR, so I can change the route. I can literally change where I'm connecting, where that web browser comes in and where my code is responding by putting slash GDPR up there. So now when I go to slash privacy, there's nothing there. Right? But if I go to slash GDPR, there's my privacy policy. So the name of my file by default is what's served, and I can change the behavior, right? Move things around just by changing that string on it, on the page directive. Yes, links are censored on the channel from folks who are not VIPs or moderators. We tend to get some trolls in this channel at times. All right. I don't understand the context there, Park Host. Give me a little bit more context. So, all right. So I can get around, I can write some code here. If I want to drop, right, some C# just in the middle of my page, right, let's close out the privacy policy. Let me go back to my index page, right? Maybe I want to have, right, not that one, this one, right? So here's stuff about Visual Studio. Maybe I want to evaluate and, right, put together, not a div, and put together some content to display on the page. Right, the current time, the current timestamp in UTC is, right, and I can do at date time, and see, Visual Studio is already pivoted and it's giving me C# information. Date time UTC now. And it'll, by default, jam a toString call on the end of that and output my content, my C# content right there inside of my markup. So let me head back over to my page, go back to the home. There you go. The current timestamp in UTC is November 30th, 1538, right? And if I refresh that, it updates each time, right, as the seconds go by. So it's code rendering on the server and being served as HTML, as static HTML to you, right? Yes, when you are typing in the chat, if you are typing ASP.NET, put a space in there so that it and we've tried to turn that off, try to have that ignore and have that be a allowed through. So this is not a SPA, correct? This is right. This is what would be the back end services to support the back office services to support a SPA, or you could generate all of your HTML and send it down appropriately, right? Which, for things on the Jamstack, that makes a lot of sense. Generate, render all of my content automatically for me so that a minimal amount of interaction is done using JavaScript or native code like Blazor running in the browser, so it does those button pushes, those interactions that you need to create and change data on the server. Let the server render more content, save out files that are then presented and available. So, all right. So, okay, we've output some information here. We've learned a little bit about Razor formatting. What about that page model thing that we saw, right? Let me save these things. And so we saw over here in index, right? There's an on-get operation that is happening. We're being, right, I mentioned dependency injection is baked into ASP.NET Core. I can inject various services, various things that I would need throughout my application just by requesting them in a constructor. Nowhere in your application are you going to be creating an index model. This is managed by the runtime. So when the ASP.NET Core runtime sees that your page model needs a parameter in the constructor, well, it's going to go find that in the dependency injection service locator and find something that matches that signature and pass it along to you. So it's passing along to me a logger, and I can interact with that. So maybe I want to put some output in here that says, hey, log that we got, right, logger, and I can say all these interactions. Come here, you, right? Log information about the request. So I'm in development mode. Well, log debug. Output the index page, right? And I'll be able to see that request every time it's delivered. So it's going to rebuild, re-update, and redeploy, and I should see output from the logger that it delivered one of those, and it's not. All right, fine. I'm going to up that to a warning. So there it is, rebuilding. It's going to serve and force the re-request. There we go. So output the index page, right? So that might be appropriate. You might want to do that if you want to put a little bit of statistic analysis. If you want to do some interaction so you can see exactly what's going on behind the scenes, you can use the logger, and by default it writes it to the console. You can reroute the logger to other places appropriately. Maybe you have a database you want to write it to. Maybe you're using a service like Seralog. All kinds of different ways that you can interact and push that data to places that are appropriate for your configuration. Yeah, information is the default minimum level. If we look at the configuration, it's actually pulling warning, right? No, it should have pulled information. So I did log debug. I should have gotten that, right? If I say log information, right? We'll see if it outputs here. So debug is one step below info, right? If you look at the logger methods, right? Critical is the most important. Error, warning, information, then debug, then trace, right? Trace is typically the most verbose on all the things that are happening. So, right, I could do something in here, like maybe I put a stopwatch, right? Let's create this as a read-only stopwatch. Give me one of those. Oh, you're not gonna... System diagnostics, right? Oh, yeah, stopwatch. Let's call this timer equals, see, I wanted to get that as a using statement. Simplify. No. Give me that. Thank you. Equals stopwatch dot. I should be able to, what is it? Start new, there it is. So as soon as this page is requested and it builds, it's going to start a timer here. Output the index page, and I can say log information, right? Page rendered in, right? And I'll output timer elapsed milliseconds. So that's being written out each time that it's being requested. There you go. 2 milliseconds to request it. I mean, there's nothing on the page, so big deal, right? 0 milliseconds, that's been cached. Doesn't need to do that. So, drinking some water here, keeping hydrated. Let me see here. Sector has a question here. Let me bring that in. And Chris answered it nicely. I'll end the giggles with a question. Let me go to this question from Sector. Why parameter type in the constructor is generic? I know it can be just the logger interface without the generic type of class. Right, so by providing this type, we're giving it a context. We're giving it, right, a category to log with. So if we look at the log over here, right, it gives that category. You can't see it behind the thing. It's right here. It gives that category, and it's also up here. Let's highlight that one. It gives that category of this is what logged this information, right? This way, when you have megs and megabytes of log information, if that category is being placed appropriately in your log store, you'll be able to filter down and say, well, I'm looking for something that happened in the index page, so I'm going to go find index model, filter and look for that, and I'll be able to look for it. Right, so that helps with the filtering of this and specifying a category name. I could also request, right, there are other ways to interact with this. I could request a logger factory and specify logger factory, create logger, and right, the category name is just it's a string that you use, right? So I could call this foo magoo, and it's going to create a logger object and stash it over here. Why are you oh, because that generic type is still up there. Go away. Right, so now I have a logger that's going to log under the context of foo magoo, and when it reruns here, instead of it building and delivering under index model, I'm now delivering the foo magoo category. It's just a standard, it's an easy way for you to pass in, well, here's the class that is logging this, and get it without writing more code, right? It's a shortcut. So, good question. Thank you for that. Thank you for that question. The Giggles had a question here as well. What's the difference between initializing the property versus in the constructor? So, if I go back over to my code, right, I initialized my timer property here instead of down here in the class constructor. By doing it up there versus down here, it's just preference. Really, they're going to be initialized split seconds apart, right? When this is instantiated, all of those variables, all of those fields there on lines 14 and 15 that I have, memory is going to be allocated for it, and then it calls the constructor. So by doing the start new there, it's also happening before the constructor is allocated, before that runs, right? So if I did something, if we got a little sneaky here, how much time do we have? We got time. We got time. We definitely got time. If I said, right, if I have a second stopwatch, let's make 3 stopwatches. Let's call this timer 2, timer 3, and I'm not going to initialize these, right? So if I initialize this up at the top here, timer 2 equals stopwatch start new, right? And we did system.threading. This is going to be evil to do. Where was it? Process thread? No, you know what I can do? task delay. Let's delay 1 second, right? Get awaiter, get results. Timer 3 equals stopwatch, start new, right? And I can say timer 2 and it'll go and restart, and we'll see those 3 timers dropped out there. There you go. So page rendered in 1007 milliseconds. Timer 2 that happened at the top in 1007 milliseconds. Timer 3, so the time between the end of the constructor and the get, 2 milliseconds. So there's a couple extra milliseconds that happened in the constructor, right? There was 5 extra milliseconds that happened up there, but just in the time from the end of the constructor to the rest of my page being rendered was 2 milliseconds. So to each their own, right? Your choice of when you want it, what you want to measure. By putting it in the above the constructor, I'm seeing all of the constructor being processed and then handed off. So and don't ever do that in your web code. You shouldn't have to write code that says delay, wait for something to finish. Don't do that. You shouldn't have to do that. That shouldn't be a thing in your code. No, they didn't start at, it looks like they started at the same time, but right? They didn't. Timer 2 started before the 1 second, and it started before it stashed that logger. That took no time to do. That, right? And we could really get precise with this. Right, and now you'll really see, right, exactly how long these took. Right? Rerun that one more time and you'll see, there's just a slight difference there. Okay. Page rendered in, let's look at just the last 4 digits there. 2162, 2432, right? So it was actually a little bit faster. Which tells me actually that didn't get called until down here. Right? 2162, timer 2 and 2432. Because timer 2 was here. That doesn't make sense to me. Because they should be... This one should have been created before that one. But, I mean, they're literally a difference of, what, 200, 300 ticks? So, yeah, if we get rid of the delay, right? 24,772, there we go. No, that's still shorter. I'm not sure why that is. That doesn't make sense to me. I'm gonna have to do some research. No, the page render isn't faster than construction. Construction has to happen first, right? So timer 2 and the timer 3 happens after it stashes the logger, right? So there's what, 872 ticks between timer 2 and timer 3. So, yeah, timer 2 looks like it's being assigned before the timer, which doesn't make sense. It shouldn't be asynchronously initializing properties. This should already be running at this time, right? I should be able to say, right, and underscore timer elapsed ticks, and ticks are just processor cycles, right? That's how long it is. Timer's at 1983 ticks. So, right, it's already been allocated ahead of time. That makes sense. Allocated first, then this, then that. So, all right. We are right at the end of time, and I think we've spent a good time here talking about how a page is built, what the page model is. This onGet is what's triggered when you request a page. We've learned a little bit about how we can add sections into our layout, how layout is built, how the page directive works up here, how we can execute and output some C# code very easily using Razor templating. Literally, that's how easy it is to output C# content into our HTML using Razor templating. Very easy, very clean to see how that works, right? I mean, we can even add properties here behind the scenes, right? And we could say something like return datetime.now.second, and if it's even, let's output blue, otherwise let's output red, right? What don't you like? I forgot the question mark. There we go. Right, so I've got this property. I can actually reach into that, and up here, instead of saying color blue, I can say at model dot font color, and it will do that evaluation of that property and emit it there in the middle of my style. It's just text to the Razor template. It doesn't care. And there it's blue. I'll refresh. Oh, I stopped it. My bad. Restart. Razor is pretty nice to work with. So clean, right? There we go. Right, and if I refresh, right, there it is. Now it's red, blue, and it doesn't care. It's just formatting. So real easy to use. I'm going to save this sample. I'm going to put it in the GitHub repository, and we're going to make that available for you to check out later, along with the recording that we're working on here. So let's wrap up here and head over to the code. Hey. You stop. There we go. Thank you so much for joining me today. This was our first episode of working with ASP.NET Core and building a server-side web page that renders and delivers HTML. Thank you so much for tuning in. This, like all of our other episodes, is going to be over on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/.net. Look for the C# with CSharpFritz playlist, and you'll find it there. Those of you that are watching on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. There's links to the playlist here and the previous video right up there. Check them out. I'm sure you're going to learn something.